Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury. I'm a traditionally published author, and welcome to this video all about how I make money as a full-time author. So in 2021, I made the transition to writing full-time. It was my first time relying solely on writing and writing adjacent things for income, and so I wanted to do this video just to share that with you. I find these are the sorts of things that I'm always really interested in because I think authors and writers can have such varied sources of income, and I just find it really interesting to see how that works when it comes to working full-time, because a lot of people talk about how it is difficult to write full-time, and I do think it's interesting to kind of see how people make that work. And so that's why I've put together this video. Also, I'm nosy like that, and so maybe other people are also nosy like that, and so this will be fun for you in that way. I will say that I'm not going to be sharing exact figures. I'm going to be sharing percentages because I'm not going to tell you exactly how much money I make. I'm one of those people where I ascribe to people don't need to know exactly how much I make. But I am going to share sort of pie chart breakdown. So in this video, I'm going to talk about both sources of income, so different sources of income, and I'm also going to talk about an income breakdown. So how much of my income goes to taxes, goes to savings, goes to retirement, that sort of thing. And so there are going to be timestamps below so you can jump around to what you think is most interesting or relevant to you during the video. And before we get started, I just want to have a little check my privilege moment, because I do think it's important when talking about writing full-time and being a full-time author to talk about the ways and different privileges that I may have that allow me to do this. It's important for me to speak about because I feel like it helps give a full picture of like why this is possible for me, if you're watching and you're trying to gauge if it's something that's possible for you as well. So to begin, I live in Canada. So in Canada, we have universal health care. So if something unexpected happens to me, I break my leg, I develop some sort of disease, I know that I can go to the hospital and I'm not going to be paying for that. So that's like a big part. So I don't need to pay for health insurance. Of course, in Canada, we do have health insurance for things like dental and vision and prescription drugs, things like that. And in that case, I am on my partner's insurance for that. So I also have coverage in that way. The cost of living where I live in my specific town is also very low. So it's not like living in Toronto, which is a lot more expensive, or living in another major city. It's a lower cost of living for more stuff. So we have a house. Also, I have fallbacks. So if for whatever reason I made very little in a year, or in fact could make zero in a year, I have my partner and family members. I have people that would be able to help me basically make up the difference for that. So I have that support system. I also have no dependents, so I don't have anyone relying on me. I don't have children. I don't have family members who I am taking care of. So that also makes a difference. And then finally, I have no debt. This is more something I've created for myself than like a privilege necessarily, though I guess maybe it is a privilege in and of itself. I won't get too much into it, but I do want to make note that I also have no debt. So I worked really hard to pay down most of my debt. And then when I got my first advance payment, it helped me out a lot. And so I have no debt, I have no car. Beyond the house, the owning of house ownership, I guess, is the only debt that I have. So I just wanted to add all of that in to help give you a full picture. And so we can go ahead and jump right into the sources of income. So I have moved off of screen in order to put this little pie chart on screen here. I will be saying the percentages aloud, so if you are visually impaired, don't worry about that. So I have a pie chart of my income sources, and I'm going to talk about each of them, starting with writing. So this is basically income that results from me doing writing projects. It's essentially advances, as it says on the chart. And this accounts for 76.9% of my income. I have a piece of paper with a copy of the chart. That's why I looked down. So yeah, so this is from advances. So I have two book deals, 2 contracts with Simon & Schuster. So the first is for Blood Like Magic and Blood Like Fate, which is my debut and its sequel. And so I was paid 1/4 of my total advance amount during this year, which is also my last payment for this book deal. And then I have my second book deal, which is for my 2023 book, Butcher Birds, and an untitled 2024 book. So another 2-book deal. And I got paid 50% of my advance for that this year. So that is what you are seeing in the pie chart. You are seeing the 50% of my Butcher Birds deal, and you are seeing the 25% of my Blood Like Magic, Blood Like Fate deal. So that's what's represented in that advances chunk. I did sign 2 other contracts this year. So I signed a contract for the Blood Like Magic Russian foreign deal, and also a contract for my short story in a short story anthology called No Harm Done, which is all about black horror stories a la Slasher Girls and Monster Boys, if you've ever heard of that anthology. And so those are 2 contracted projects as well. However, I will be paid for those, I believe, in early 2022, and so I haven't included them on this chart because they're not part of my 2021 income. So those are 2 projects that I was contracted for in 2021, but will be paid in a separate year, so then I didn't put them on that chart. And I will also note that these are all advances, as I said, because I don't currently do any freelance editing or any ghostwriting. Now we're going to move on to events / appearances. So these are essentially honorariums, and they account for 1.3% of my total income. So I get these essentially for appearing on panels, that sort of thing. I will say that I've never asked for an honorarium. I do know that people do ask, and I do think there are situations where you should be asking. I just didn't for whatever reason. I think just being a debut author and not really knowing when to ask and when not to ask. But usually when I got an honorarium, it was as part of the pitch. So they would invite me to be on the panel and they would say, there's an honorarium of X amount of money. I also did a workshop, and the honorarium for that is included in this. A workshop where if I had been asked to do a workshop, I would have 100% asked for an honorarium, because a workshop is a lot of work. Repeating words. A workshop is a lot more effort than, for example, showing up on a panel, because you have to create a presentation, you have to prepare, you have to do those sorts of things. It's a lot more labor intensive. So I would say if you are an author and you're being asked to do a workshop, I would ask for an honorarium then. And also from other authors, I haven't done school visits, and I think this is like particularly relevant more so for middle grade authors. But if you're an MG author and you're being asked to do a school visit, I would definitely ask for an honorarium in that case as well. But yeah, and these mostly came from my Canadian publisher, the events with honorariums. There was like one thing with an honorarium that did come from the US side, but they mostly came from the Canadian side. I don't know if that says anything about anything, but that is what it was. So I just figured I would go ahead and note that. So my third source of income was grants. So it was really one grant, but I put it under grants, and that accounts for 20.2% of my overall income. So this is based on a Canada Arts grant that I received, and I will now talk more about the Canada Arts grant process. Again, I have timestamps, so if you're like, this is really not relevant to me and I'm not interested because I'm not Canadian, you can feel free to skip forward to the next section. But I did have some Canadians in my comments previously when I've talked about the Canada Arts grant that have wanted to hear more about that process. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about it, because the Canada Arts grant was a really huge help to me. As you can see, it was a pretty good chunk of my income for the year, and I found it to be super, super helpful. So I applied for the Canada Arts grant in the research and creation. So there are different grants that you can apply for, and the one that I applied for was research and creation. There are also provincial grants, but I decided to apply for the Canada Arts grant because frankly, it is more money. And I figure if I apply for this one grant, then I could get all the money that I need for that year, as opposed to if I applied for the Ontario grants, I would have to kind of apply for multiple grants to get an amount that was larger. So that's why I just applied to the Canada Arts Grant. But if I hadn't been approved for the Canada Arts Grant, I would have applied to an Ontario grant. So essentially, research and creation, meaning that you're applying for researching a book and creating it. There are more details on the website. I definitely recommend checking out the Canada Arts Grant website. This video section is not a replacement for the information on the website. I'm just sharing my experience with you. So you can apply for different periods of time. I applied to work on a project for a year, because in the creation process, I really only expect to work on a project for a year before I end up, putting it on submission. And so I just thought that was a better time frame for me. I also just like how even it is. So I applied for a time frame of a year. You can apply for 2 years. I believe it's up to 2 years. And if you apply for a longer period of time, then you can ask for more money. And the website lists the maximums that you can get, things like that. So what you have to do is you have to apply for your applicant profile to be approved. So do this as soon as possible, because you cannot apply to any grants until your applicant profile is approved. So what you have to do is you submit a CV or a resume, basically being like, I'm an author, and they have a list of requirements on the website for basically saying which applicant profile you are eligible for. And you don't have to have a traditionally published book coming out. I do know someone who applied for the applicant profile and was approved without having a traditional publishing deal. So that's not something that you need to have, in my experience, based on, this person that applied and didn't have a book and got approved for an applicant profile. So once your profile is approved, then you can apply for the grants. And so at that point you are submitting a budget, and then they have some questions they ask you. So the budget section is basically I would say it's kind of like 2 parts. So there's a certain salary section where you're essentially saying, this is how much money I need per week that I'm working on this project to work on this project. And then there's also additional sections if you need equipment to work on the project, if you need to travel to work on the project, so you're filling out that form. And then there's also a separate form, which is essentially the questions that they're going to be asking you when you apply. So it's basically like a practice sheet so that you can see what all the questions are. I recommend downloading that and filling that form in and editing that. And that way when you go to submit your actual grant application, you're just filling in the answers that you already have, and that way you have lots of time to work on it and to edit it and things like that. So essentially the questions are all sorts of things, but they're things like asking you to describe your project, asking you what your inspiration for the project is, how you think that your project will contribute to literature, all sorts of questions like that. Some of the questions are larger, they're 500 word or 750 word questions. In that case, I approached them like a mini essay. So I basically had an introductory paragraph, I had 3 supporting paragraphs, and then I had a conclusion paragraph. And that's basically how I did it. So I applied to get funding for my adult horror. And so that was originally 6 days and 5 nights. And so I talked a lot about the themes I was going to talk about in there, about, the millennial workforce and toxic workplace, things like that. I also talked about writing from the perspective of a Black woman, and I talked about, a Canadian setting. That one was going to be set in Toronto. And I submitted it that way. And you may be thinking, Liselle, didn't you change your mind and do a different adult horror? Yes, I did. And so when that happened, so after I got approved for the grant, because there was such a big gap between when I applied and when I got approved, so by the time I got approved, I had already switched to working on a different adult horror. And so I submitted basically a report saying the things about my project that had changed. So I explained that the other project wasn't working out really well, and I switched to this other project, and these were the sorts of things I was going to explore about it. And then I had to submit that and get approved for that, and then everything was fine. I am not sure what would have happened if they rejected it. I guess maybe I wouldn't have gotten the grant, but that's what happened. So if you are wondering about the time period and if your idea changes, you are given a chance to submit that. And then finally, at the end of the time period of when you were supposed to be working on the project, you submit your final report. So your final report is due like much later than that. So I believe my final report isn't due until like mid 2022, but you do have to submit a final report basically saying how the project went. I haven't submitted that yet, so I can't tell you how that part goes, but that is part of the process, and that's essentially everything. If you are confused about things, if you want help, I definitely recommend going to the website and filling out their support form or calling them. They're super helpful, and they will be able to walk you through certain things, and they have the exact information that you need, and they also have accommodations for if you have learning disabilities or other disabilities and you need accommodations. So that's basically it for the Canada Arts Grant. The next source of income is YouTube. So YouTube accounts for 0.7% of my total income. And I wrote YouTube AdSense because I've only received money from YouTube through AdSense. I haven't done any sponsored content, so no like sponsored by Skillshare or Squarespace or what have you. So this is all based on AdSense. I do consider this part of my author income because I have an Authortube channel, and also because if you're on this channel, I assume it's kind of interesting to you perhaps to see how much of my income comes from YouTube. And now you know, very little. So on YouTube is not something I'm doing to make money. And I hope if anything makes that clear, this breakdown makes that very clear. I do YouTube because I like it and because I like sharing this information with my audience, and I like having things like writing vlogs that I can look back on to track my writing and that sort of thing. So yeah, YouTube AdSense, very small amount of my income. And also I will say that I get paid from YouTube AdSense once every other month. So you have to meet a threshold of $100 in order for them to pay you out. And I don't meet that threshold every month. So I usually get paid every other month. More recently, as my channel has grown, I have been paid every month. But certainly when I started out, closer in my second year, I think in my second year is when I got approved for ads, and it was closer to the latter end where it was every other month, then turning into every month. But in the beginning, it was like every 3 or 4 months. So in case you are interested in that breakdown as well. So yeah, YouTube AdSense, pretty small part of it. But yeah, I think it's, in Authortube, that community, I think my channel is more of a mid-range to perhaps higher amount following channel. Oh my gosh, so coherent. The amount of followers I have within the Authortube community is not small. But in the grand scheme of YouTube, it is very small. And so to me, it makes total sense that this is like the amount it accounts for in my total income. But money is money, and I'm still happy and appreciative of having that as part of my income. So that's YouTube. And the final source of writing income is awards. So really just one award in particular. So I was nominated for the Governor General Award for Blood Like Magic. And so that came with some money. And so that was sent to me, and that was 0.9% of my total income. So like a small percentage, but a significant percentage. And I certainly appreciated it. Obviously awards you can't plan for. I would say the same of like honorariums. You can't really plan for that money. I really don't think you can plan for any author money, but at least YouTube and writing and grants, like those are all things that I could like put effort into trying to achieve, versus awards and what was the other one? Honorariums are just kind of things that seem to pop up. So yeah, that's it for that little awards section. Hello, you may notice that things are looking a little bit different. Long story short, I made an error in my finances that I didn't realize I had made when I had filmed the rest of this video, and I realized it later, and so I wanted to come in and just redo this little bit because it was wrong, and I just wanted to fix it and provide you more up-to-date stats. I'm also a little sick, hopefully not COVID, test is pending. But yeah, sorry, that's why my voice is like this. Yeah, so let's just go ahead. So this is my income breakdown for things like savings and retirement and taxes. So my take-home amount, so this is my amount that I basically use to pay for all of my stuff. So my amount after taxes and after savings and after retirement, and that's 32.9% of my total income for the year. Taxes is 11.9%, savings is 11.4%, and retirement is 43.8%. So now I'll talk more about each of those chunks. So my taxes is my taxes based on everything but retirement, just the way that things work in Canada. You can have a special account where what you put away for retirement is it part of your taxable income. So my taxes is based on my savings and my take-home amount. So I also expect my taxes to be less than what I put on here. This is the estimated maximum of my taxes, but I do write things off every year with my accountant. I write off a bunch of things with her, and so I actually expect this amount to be less than I have posted here, but I always save the maximum amount just in case. I'd rather have too much than have too little. So I put away that tax amount and I don't touch it, because when you start dipping into your taxes, things can get really complicated when tax time comes around and suddenly you're scrambling to find that money, or you owe the government and you have to like pay them over time. And like, I know that I don't know a lot about taxes in the States, but apparently it's like pretty serious. And what I'll also mention, because I know for authors in the US, they talk about like paying taxes at different quarters and things like that. Again, I'm not familiar with taxes in the US, but in Canada, we pay taxes once a year. So I'll pay taxes during tax time in April, so I don't pay several times during the year, at least in Canada for my like business taxes. I'm not sure if it's different if you're incorporated or things like that, but that's how it works for me. I pay taxes once a year. I don't pay multiple times during the year. So I think that's all I have to say for taxes. Actually, I'm going to talk about retirement first. So for retirement, you may notice that my retirement chunk is like massive. And basically that was essentially like I wanted to max out my retirement. So in Canada we have a thing called an RRSP, and so for me that's where I store retirement funds, and I previously hadn't really made any strides towards saving for retirement, and so I decided to max this out. Also, again, like I said, what you put into retirement is not considered part of your taxable income. So in Canada, you may want to put more in your retirement in situations like this, essentially. So I ended up maxing out my retirement. So I put a ton of money in there this year, because you have limits on how much you can put in every year. So next year I'll probably put in less because my limit will be smaller. My limit was really large because, again, I had not done very well at saving for retirement in other years. I just like didn't have excess money to put into that. So what was saved for retirement was just like kind of whatever my work took out of my paychecks. I never added more. And so in this case, I maxed that out. So that was good. And then my savings, I just tried to put away a bit. In the future, I'd like to definitely put more into savings, but anyway, I put 11.4% of my income into savings. And yeah, that's just kind of general savings. We do have different sort of savings accounts in Canada. So if you're Canadian and you're interested, my savings that I'm counting are going into my TFSA, which is a tax-free savings account. It's a whole thing. And I want to reiterate that I messed this up earlier and I only fixed it recently. So I'm not about to like give you any sort of financial advice about like what to do. I'm just sharing that this is what I did and this is where chunks of my income went. So overall, basically this year, most of my income went towards retirement. and my take home was like smaller, but I want to iterate that I was like very comfortable this year. I wasn't in the struggle. So this ended up working out for me. And yeah, in future years, I'd like to have more in that savings section. But yeah, that's basically how I broke down that income. And thank you for bearing with me and my voice and this sudden change in format. And yeah, past Liselle will wrap this up for you. So that is it for my how I make money as a full-time author video. I hope that this was interesting or enlightening for you, or like helped kind of give you an idea of like writing full-time from a traditional author perspective. This is of course my very specific experience, but I hope that's helpful to you. And I will also link to a video from Michelle Schusterman. She did a video where she shares exact figures of, you know, dollar signs. So if you're like, ooh, I want to see like dollar signs from someone in traditional publishing, I would recommend checking out her video. It's what gave me the idea for this video, because I was like, oh, that's really fun. And she also does ghostwriting, so she talks about that. I believe she also teaches classes, so that might be in there as well, but I can't 100% remember. But it's a really good video, and she has a whole series about like ghostwriting and becoming a ghostwriter and like building up that practice. So if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely also recommend checking out her video series, which I will have linked below. And yeah, I hope this was interesting to you. I think this is really interesting. I always love stuff like this, so I thought it would be fun to do on the channel. And definitely let me know if you would like to have this be a regular occurrence, if you'd like to see this be kind of an annual video that I do, because I expect that these sorts of figures will change as time goes on, and the breakdowns, the shifting of the pie charts will be different depending on different things. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting. So let me know if that's something you would like to see. And yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!